Asalam Ualaikam Wara Matulahi Waba Akitu.
Think about those moments, those things that just make you laugh out loud instantly. It doesn't matter where you are, what language you speak, a perfectly timed slip, maybe, or just a completely bewildered look. It's that power of nonverbal comedy.
Yeah, it hits you right away.
And, I mean, for so many of us, the absolute master, the king of this, has got to be Mr. Bean.
Oh, absolutely. It's really quite remarkable, isn't it? You've got this character who can just, have you in stitches, completely cracking up, without saying much more than a few grunts, maybe a mumble here and there. It really makes you wonder about that sort of deep universal language of, physical humor. Why does it connect so strongly with pretty much everyone?
Right, and that's exactly what we want to dig into today. We've gone through a lot of material trying to understand the real nuts and bolts of Mr. Bean's comedy. His genius, really. The techniques, the choices he makes, the magic that makes him so funny, even now. Consider this our shortcut, maybe, to understanding why his specific brand of humor has had such a massive global impact.
So our mission for this deep dive, then, is to really try and unpack those fundamental comedic principles that Mr. Bean uses so well. We want to explore why these techniques work, why they land so effectively with audiences all over the world, sort of cutting through those cultural and language barriers that often divide us.
Okay, great. So let's get into it. One of the most, I think, compelling things about Mr. Bean is the character himself. You often hear him described as like a person who grew physically but never really mentally.
Yeah, the man-child thing.
Exactly, a proper man-child navigating the adult world, but with this really distinct sort of childlike logic.
That's a great place to start, actually, and it really highlights a key element of his appeal, this inherent contradiction, The adult body, but with a mind that operates on simple, almost like primal reasoning. It creates this constant source of humor.
Yeah. It's the clash, isn't it? The unexpected difference between what you'd anticipate an adult doing and the, often absurd reality of what Mr. Bean actually does.
And it's in those really everyday situations where this just shines. Like, I remember the Christmas episode. Most adults, they'd open Christmas crackers one by one, right?
The normal way.
But Mr. Bean's logic is, if one cracker is fun, then obviously combining a whole handful into one giant mega cracker must be even better.
Precisely. It's that wonderfully flawed sort of childlike thinking applied to these very familiar, very adult scenarios.
Yeah.
That's what triggers the laugh. It's absurd, yes, but there's also this weird relatability sometimes. Haven't we all had moments where our own simple logic led somewhere completely unexpected, maybe even hilariously wrong?
Oh, totally. And even when he's being a bit mischievous, getting up to no good, there's a kind of innocence there. It makes it hard to really dislike him for it. Like the exam episode, his attempts to cheat are so elaborate, but also just completely hopeless. Yeah, and what's so interesting there is how that naivety, it almost acts like a comedic shield. His intentions don't feel malicious or properly cunning like a real cheat.
Right.
Instead, it just feels like this desperate, almost childlike scramble to get through, which, like you said, makes even those dodgy actions somehow endearing, not actually nasty.
Right. Okay, so given Mr. Bean barely speaks, another huge element obviously comes into play. Physical comedy. This really is the main language he uses to communicate the humor.
Exactly. With hardly any dialogue, his body, his physicality, it becomes the main way he tells the story and gets those laughs. And within that, Rowan Atkinson's mastery over his face, his expressions, even the tiniest little gestures, it's just astounding.
Someone called his face a comedic canvas, and that really resonated with me. He can tell whole stories, show this whole range of emotions, just with a tiny eyebrow raise or a little twitch of his nose. You feel like you know exactly what he's thinking without a word.
And what makes that facial elasticity so effective is how it just ramps up the absurdity of whatever situation he's in. Remember the restaurant scene? The famous steak tartare bit?
Oh, yeah. Class.
The sheer disgust, the crazy schemes he cooks up to avoid eating it, it's all communicated through these wonderfully over-the-top facial expressions. And that leads directly into some brilliant slapstick moments that are still hilarious today.
And it's almost like Atkinson has this switch, he can just turn the Bean persona on and off. You see him in interviews, he's articulate, quite composed. And then just a slight shoulder slump or a specific head tilt, and boom, Mr. Bean is just there. It's fascinating to watch that transformation.
It really shows how deeply he understands the character and his commitment to the physical side of it. Now, moving beyond just the face, amazing as it is, Mr. Bean also uses exaggerated movement and, well, what you could call carefully choreographed chaos.
Yes. Even the simplest things, like just mundane tasks, become these huge physical productions.
Yeah.
That scene in the hotel corridor, where he's trying to be quiet, and he ends up mimicking the elderly guests with these incredibly exaggerated tiptoes and shuffles.
Wow, yeah.
It's almost like a dance of pure awkwardness.
And what's funny there is the sheer overcomplication of it all. Just walking down a hallway becomes this ridiculously complex performance, and that contrast, simple problem, absurdly complex solution, that's a theme that keeps coming back in his humor. Maybe it resonates because we all overthink things sometimes.
Definitely. And who could possibly forget the swimming pool scene, the agony on the diving board, the endless hesitation,
Oh, the high dive.
and then the final spectacularly ungraceful fall. It's just a masterclass in building up comedic tension and then delivering this physical payoff that gets you every single time.
Absolutely. And if you think about the comedic timing there, it's all so meticulously arranged. The lifeguard's whistle, the other swimmers' panic, Mr. Bean being totally oblivious. It all lines up perfectly. Impeccable timing creates this just side-splitting sequence.
Okay, switching gears slightly. You notice his episodes often feel like a series of self-contained visual gags, don't they? There's usually a setup. Things quickly go wrong, complicate things.
Spiral out of control.
Yeah. And then there's usually some kind of catastrophic but still undeniably funny ending.
That's a really good observation about the structure. These visual gags, they're often built with a surprising amount of, cleverness. One technique that crops up a lot, which people might recognize even if they don't know the name, is the rule of three.
Ah, yes. Can you maybe explain that a bit for anyone listening? What exactly is the rule of three in comedy?
Sure. So the rule of three, it's a classic comedy principle. You basically set up a pattern or an action twice. And then the third time, you break that pattern. You do something unexpected and funny. The dentist scene is a perfect example.
Right. He puts on a little bit of anesthesia, then does it again.
Establishing the pattern.
And then, clearly not satisfied, he just tips the whole bottle in, right? And his entire face just goes completely numb, paralyzed. It's the escalation that gets you.
Exactly. The first two controlled squirts, they set up an expectation, a sort of normalcy, and then the third one just obliterates that normalcy. It escalates to this completely absurd, visually hilarious result that just catches you off guard. It creates this sort of rhythmic humor that audiences just naturally respond to.
And then there's just the brilliant way Mr. Bean constantly messes with your expectations. You think he's going to tackle a problem one way, the logical way, and then he does something completely out of left field, something you just never saw coming.
That element of surprise, it's so vital in comedy, and Bean uses it brilliantly. Think about the art gallery episode. You probably expect him to try and, subtly fix the painting he damaged, maybe some clever blending or something.
But no, he just rips the damaged bit out and sticks a cheap postcard over it.
Yes.
And then just when you think it can't get any sillier, he spills the cleaning fluid and melts the postcard too. It's the sheer nerve.
Precisely. It's the unexpectedness of his actions, the way he seems to always make things worse, but in the most creative and unforeseen ways. That generates so much of the laughter. It's that delightful shock of the unexpected.
And we absolutely have to mention some of those just iconic physical gags, the ones everyone remembers, like the agonizingly slow swimming pool dive, that endless internal struggle, the incredibly complex but totally useless cheating in the exam, getting his head stuck in the Christmas turkey. That's a holiday classic for laughs.
A tradition in many houses, I suspect.
And all those parking moments, squeezing the Mini into impossible spots, driving it from an armchair on the roof, just pure visual gold. These moments just stick with you.
They really do. These examples just underline his genius for taking very ordinary, everyday situations and pushing them into this realm of, delightful absurdity purely through physical comedy. It's the familiar made hilariously unfamiliar.
So just to kind of cement things, let's maybe break down the core techniques again. What really defines Mr. Bean's specific brand of physical humor? We could sort of summarize the key elements.
Okay, well, you see it constantly in his exaggerated movements, the way he twists his body to fit into tiny spaces or stretches like mad to reach something just out of reach. Then, obviously, those incredibly expressive facial gestures, communicating everything from total frustration to pure mischievous glee, all without a word. He also has this fantastic knack for using props, ordinary objects, in clever and completely unexpected ways, turning them into tools for chaos or, sources of brilliant humor.
And the situations themselves, they often start so normal, so relatable. Just going to the supermarket, trying to have a meal out.
Things we all do.
Exactly.
As-
The familiar just twisted into farce.
Absolutely. And kind of underpinning all of that, the secret sauce maybe, is his impeccable timing. That tiny pause before he does something, that delayed reaction after something happens, it all just amplifies the comedy. There's also, I think, a strong element of relatability in just his general awkwardness, his incompetence, really, at navigating the adult world, even though it's obviously exaggerated for laughs.
Sure.
And of course, minimizing the dialogue forces everyone to focus entirely on the visual story, makes those physical gags hit even harder.
Okay, so if we zoom out a bit now, look at the bigger picture of Mr. Bean's comedy. What are the key features that really define his style overall? What makes it so distinct and so universally loved, do you think?
Well, first and foremost, it has to be that incredible universal appeal, right? Driven largely by the lack of dialogue, of course, but also the focus on these really relatable everyday themes. I mean, everyone, no matter where they're from or what language they speak, they've probably felt the frustration of eating out or the hassle of traveling or just, the general awkwardness of daily life.
Definitely.
And the heavy reliance on physical comedy that directly taps into this universality. It sort of echoes the great silent film comedians like Chaplin or Keaton, whose humor also crossed language barriers effortlessly.
And that childlike perspective we talked about, that sort of innocent way he approaches the world, that seems absolutely vital too, doesn't it? That's why his failures are funny, not just sad or annoying to watch. You kind of root for him, even when he's making a total mess of things.
Exactly. That inherent naivety, it really cushions his mistakes and makes him this, endearing underdog figure. We also see this constant pattern, ordinary tasks escalating into complete chaos. Starts simple, manageable, and quickly spirals into a series of increasingly absurd and hilarious events. You just can't help but laugh.
And it's amazing how timeless it all feels, really. There aren't many, dated pop culture references or specific things that would make it feel old now.
That's a real credit to focusing on fundamental human experiences,
Right.
not just passing trends or specific cultural moments. And we absolutely have to mention Rowan Atkinson's incredible precision. His execution,
Oh, yeah.
the timing, the physicality, it's all so meticulously crafted and delivered for maximum comedic effect. And like we said earlier, that constant subversion of expectations keeps you watching, keeps you laughing. And finally, that deliberate lack of dialogue is just key to breaking down those language barriers. Makes him a truly global comedy icon.
So if we were trying to pull out some actionable insights from all this, what would Mr. Bean's sort of hypothetical guide to making people laugh be? Any practical takeaways here?
Well, if we imagine Mr. Bean giving advice, which would probably involve a lot of grunts and pointing, it would likely focus on the power of physical comedy, right? Finding humor in those very everyday, relatable situations we all face. He'd probably stress the critical importance of timing and precision, that perfectly held pause, that expertly timed look.
Definitely pushing the silent humor angle, I bet. Let the actions do all the talking, louder than words.
Absolutely, and always subverting expectations. Keep the audience guessing, never quite sure what crazy thing he'll do next. Maybe even that element of over-articulation in sounds and expressions, his classic sound, those big facial reactions. And certainly a strong focus on creating clear, engaging visual gags that tell a story without needing a load of explanation. If we're to boil it down to some rules based on his success, it might be keep the idea simple, commit totally to the character in the gag, be consistent with who that character is, and generally steer clear of humor that's offensive or relies on excluding people.
Now, Mr. Bean isn't just about funny ideas, is he? It's also about the incredible skill in how they're performed. He's really a masterclass in comedic delivery.
Oh, that's such a crucial point. Even the most brilliantly written jokes or concepts, they need skillful delivery to really land, to actually get the laugh. And Atkinson's mastery absolutely elevates the humor in Bean's situations. Timing, as we've mentioned, is just paramount. Even though Bean has hardly any verbal punchlines, his physical actions have these amazing comedic payoffs that rely so heavily on those pauses before and after the main action.
That little beat of silence before he tries something completely mad, or that blank, almost confused stare afterwards. It's all part of this incredibly precise comedic rhythm that just keeps you glued.
Exactly. And then there's the amazing variation in pace. He can switch seamlessly from moments of frantic, almost manic energy to scenes of really slow, deliberate absurdity. That constant shift keeps things interesting, keeps you engaged. Even with his limited speech, his noises, the grunts, the mumbles, the sighs, they add so much to the overall tone and the comedy. And, well, obviously, obviously, the massive role of physical comedy and body language, those endlessly expressive faces and exaggerated movements, they are absolutely central to his delivery.
And even though he never directly talks to the audience, there's this real feeling of connection, isn't there? You somehow feel like you get exactly what he's thinking or feeling, even though he's barely making a sound.
That relatability, even in his most bizarre moments, that's what builds that bond. And there's this undeniable energy, this unwavering confidence in Atkinson's performance, even when Mr. Bean is totally clueless. That complete commitment to the character, it's infectious. It's a huge part of why he's so incredibly watchable.
So, when we place Mr. Bean in the sort of broader landscape of comedy, how does he fit in, within the art and science of making people laugh? Where does he sit compared to other comedy people might know?
Well, if we look at the bigger picture, Bean clearly belongs to that rich tradition of physical and visual comedy, almost like a modern heir to legends like Chaplin and Buster Keaton. He's a perfect example of character-driven comedy, too. So much of the humor comes directly from his very specific, exaggerated persona. His heavy use of visual gags often cleverly plays with the idea of, scene cuts, even if they're not actual edits, creating humor through unexpected juxtapositions, actions and reactions that just catch you by surprise.
And that rule of three we talked about, that's not just a Bean thing, is it? That's a wider comedy tool he just uses incredibly well.
Precisely. It's a fundamental technique in comedy structure. Creates anticipation, then delivers that funny twist, and maybe most importantly, his lack of dialogue makes his comedy so incredibly accessible across different cultures. It really highlights that whole discussion about what makes humor truly universal. Ultimately, Bean's humor is just deeply rooted in the principle of incongruity, unexpected results, absurd solutions to simple problems. And you see that consistent building and escalating structure in his scenes. Starts small, then snowballs into these hilariously chaotic messes that are just, a joy to watch unfold.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive into, the enduring comedic genius of Mr. Bean, what are the main takeaways? What should we keep in mind about what makes his comedy work so well and why it's so loved?
I think it really comes down to a few key things. The sheer power of physical comedy to just cut through language barriers and connect with people on a really basic level. The endearing relatability of that childlike character trying to figure out the adult world. The incredible effectiveness of his precise timing and those wonderfully inventive visual gags, and ultimately just the undeniable universal appeal of humor that doesn't need translating to make us laugh.
And maybe on that note, here's something to think about. Considering all these techniques we've discussed, what is it about physical comedy specifically that makes it so enduring? Across different generations, different cultures. And maybe, can you now spot bits of Mr. Bean's approach in other successful comedians, even ones who use a lot more dialogue?
That's a really interesting question to ponder. And I'd also maybe encourage people to think about those specific Mr. Bean moments that always get them, the ones that really stand out and make them laugh. What was it about that particular face, or that clumsy move, or that totally unexpected result that really hit the funny bone?
Because, really getting these fundamental comedy principles, it isn't just about appreciating Mr. Bean more. It can actually give some pretty valuable insights into communication, into storytelling, really in all sorts of different areas.
Well, thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us.
Why did the stand-up comedian get a PhD in comedy? Because he wanted to master the setup punchline. And the thesis defense, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Today, I will prove using Aristotelian structure and a whoopee cushion that timing is everything. Why did Hamlet fail his comedy class? Because every time he told a joke, he paused, looked at the audience, and said, to laugh or not to laugh. That is the question. Meanwhile, the jesters in the back like, bro, just hit the punchline. And that's a wrap on the art and science of comedy, techniques, and forms. We've covered everything from slapstick to satire, improv to irony, proving that comedy isn't just an art, it's also a science where the only formula you really need is tragedy plus time equals stand-up special. If this made you laugh, think, or even groan just a little, like, comment, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next act. And remember, a bad joke might fall flat, but your support, that always lands. Mic drop, cue laugh track. Ha 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 ha, he ha ha. But ha ha ha, no ha ha, stop it, ha ha ha. Wah ha ha, ha ha ha. Fools! Even my punchlines are powerful. He has not ha ha ha, I'm crying. Ha ha, ha. Wow, okay. Oh no, dot pfft dash ha dash no. Stop ha ha ha.